This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Yo, this is Rashani from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Charmaine, aka Mixed Girl Maine, and if you've been with me for a while, you know that technically I'm supposed to be on a break during the month of April. I had a very difficult month in March. I lost my cat. I have another sick cat. I've dealt with some health issues. I'm having some work troubles. My husband's bike got stolen, which he's had for 11 years and is really emotionally attached to. It's been a shitty month. So I was going to take this month off of April and try to recharge my batteries, allow myself to properly grieve for my cat, and take care of my health because I really don't take care of myself. Trying to take care of myself. And I'm failing at it. FYI, I'm failing at it. So yeah, I wasn't going to be doing intros all month, but I really feel like I need to preface what we're about to experience because it was a really exciting event for me. And generally, I don't know, it's really hard to be fully disconnected from these shows. Even as I take breaks, it's important for me to be as connected as possible. So whatever, I'm failing at my break, but I'm excited about what I'm going to tell you. So last week I was traveling in Sacramento, California for a number of events that was set up for me by Sierra College, and more specifically Johnny Terry, who is a personal friend, but he is a teacher that I met at Sierra College when I was a student there. He was my now husband, then BFF's first philosophy teacher. He is the reason why my husband has gone down the path of philosophy. And so Johnny was his first professor. Now he is a professor of philosophy as well. And for me, my first introduction to Johnny Terry was I guess I did go to his class with my husband, just to observe or whatever, and he pointed me out as soon as I sat down. He's like, "You're not in my class, who are you?" And it was probably an instant love connection there. But I was also a technical director for distance learning classes at Sierra College as part of my work study, and he was one of the classes I was assigned to. And so we developed a relationship through, talking over the cameras and controlling the cameras while he taught his classes for distance learning. And all these years later, we're still friends. But he helped arrange for these events at Sierra College for me. And before I get started, I want to thank Johnny Terry and Tamal and Rose and Mika and Megan, all for either arranging events for me or arranging students for me or helping get me to the places I needed to be. It was a really great experience altogether. I was there for their Love Your Body Week at Sierra College. I did speak on the different beauty standards between white and brown bodies and black bodies and yellow bodies. And we blew open, this is so sad, but we blew open the minds of a lot of the white kids that were in attendance then because they have never heard or been exposed to the differences of beauty standards for yellow, brown, and black bodies. And thank goodness I had participation from the students in the class, so I wasn't the only authority, quote unquote, in the room. There were several students who spoke up on behalf of whatever their ethnic groups were and how their beauty standards are treated, and you could see the effect it had on the white kids there because they did not realize that we dealt with the things that we deal with. And so it was all in all a really successful event, I think. Afterwards, I also had several students come up and talk to me, either to tell me that they had never heard the kinds of things we talked about, how you light brown and black bodies, what's considered skinny and fat for brown and black bodies, things like that, how celebrities are treated differently, things like that. There was a lot of stuff we covered during that talk, and I had a few students come up to me afterwards to express their surprise. And then I had a few come and express their, what do I do to be better and to learn more kind of sentiments as well. So it was a really great experience. I don't know if I'm going to be able to share that in a future episode because I'm not sure if you could hear the students when they talked, and I don't want there to be a lot of dead air. But to be honest, at the time that I'm recording this, I have not listened back to it, so I don't know if it's usable yet. But I do know that my 4 interviews for Militantly Mixed are, so you're going to be hearing those over the next couple weeks. And I will get into sharing the first interview that I experienced in Sacramento in a few seconds. But before that, I want to say that these experiences that I had in Sacramento this last week have really opened my eyes to what the path is, the new path for Militantly Mixed. As I will never stop doing the long distance interviews because I need to have access to people all over the world to share mixed race representation for everybody. So that is never going to change. But these experiences of being able to do interviews on the road with people and sit face to face and engage with them directly about what their mixed race experience has been like, or their intersectional LGBTQ plus POC experiences like, it really has changed my motivation a little bit into the direction of getting Militantly Mixed on the road more often. So I am going to be doing a big fundraiser from now until the anniversary date of Militantly Mixed, which is July 5th. Between now and then, I would like to raise $2,500, $2,500 to help promote Militantly Mixed on the road. This would be to get small venues to allow us to record in public and help generate an audience for us, or to market myself to more community colleges and the other college circuits, so I can continue these intersectional identity discussions. I think this is really is a different experience to look the person in the eyes while we talk about intersectional identity and really connect, person to person within that experience. It's a little different than doing it online. Online over Skype, you still get connected to people, and I still now have many of these people continue to be in my life, and we message each other on a regular basis, and I can't wait to meet some of them in person, which I do hope will be possible as I do get to travel more often for the show. But these person-to-person ones in front of an audience and having audience participation and audience asking questions really does change the game a little bit, so I'm going to do that. I talk every week about the different ways that you can contribute to the show to help keep us going and growing, and this is going to be slightly different. So for regular support of the show, you can still go to patreon.com/militantlymixed and subscribe for a monthly support of the show, anything as low as $1 to as high as anything you wish. There's different reward levels depending on what level you contribute at, and that's how the show keeps going publicly. That's how our hosting fees are covered, so that you can listen to it on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Overcast, YouTube, Spotify. I'm still pushing for Pandora and iHeartRadio. But the patreon.com is how you get to hear the show. With those donations, I'm able to continue to produce a show every week. So you can contribute that way. Or if you would like to participate in this big fundraiser to push for getting Militantly Mixed on the road more often, you can go to paypal.me/militantlymixed. Donate anything as low as $1 to as high as anything you wish. And between now and July 5th, 2019, I am going to be updating everybody on Instagram and Twitter as to how far we've come in our donations. These donations will help significantly in getting a larger audience for the show. Every donation does help and contribute to that, but this is actually going to be a dedicated push to market the show across at least at first across the United States, and then eventually as we get a little bit bigger, hopefully we can start getting more funding to market outside of the United States as well. So if you'd like to help get Militantly Mixed on the road, and maybe actually at your town or your city or your college or whatever, please consider contributing to the paypal.me/militantlymixed fund, because that's the next stage in the evolution of Militantly Mixed. Yeah, I think that's good. And I did say I wasn't going to do a long intro, and I have done one. Okay, so let me talk about what's going on this week. This is the very first event that I had when I was up in Sacramento. I was at the Lavender Library in downtown Sacramento. Shout out to Cindy and Nancy there for organizing the space and allowing us to be in the library to record this episode. The Lavender Library is a LGBTQ plus safe space. It's a library with books and periodicals and magazines and even a porn section that is all LGBTQ plus content. It's an awesome space, and they, carved out a little area of the library for us to be able to record this interview in front of an audience, and it was awesome. And I was in Sacramento when this was originally created, but I had not heard about it until last year, which is unfortunate because it might have been a nice space for me when I was a little baby bisexual trying to figure out what was going on, that I could have gone, but I didn't know about it. And so I think if you are in the Sacramento area, please go to the show notes. You'll see a link to the Lavender Library and the address and everything like that, and see if it's a good resource for you. And then my guest, his name is Clarmundo Sullivan. He is the organizer of the Golden Rule Services in Sacramento. The Golden Rule Services is an organization that creates a culturally conscious POC space for health, education, support on social justice issues, things like that. It was a response to the gap in what was available to POC LGBT people in the Sacramento area back when it was created in, I believe it was 1998, 2000, somewhere around there. Clarmundo he's educated in social work, and he was also responsible for creating spaces during the the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic for POC folks that were affected to go to. So it was a really awesome person to get a chance to speak. It was a great person to have as my very first live in front of an audience episode. So I'm really excited. Please go to the show notes. You'll get all the links you need for Golden Rule Services and for the Lavender Library. And then as the future weeks come up, you'll hear the recordings that I did with students at Sierra College during the Love Your Body Week for Militantly Mixed. So it was a great time. I got a lot of stuff squeezed into 3 days. I was emotionally flat after that trip, though, because recording that many interviews back to back and hearing all those stories, not to mention the people that came up to me after recordings just to talk. It was a pretty heavy week, so it has taken me about a week to kind of come back to sort of my baseline from doing that. I was pretty exhausted. So if you have been emailing or tweeting or Instagram messaging and I haven't replied to you yet, I'm not ignoring you. I will reply shortly. I'm just trying to catch up after coming back home and everything like that. So keep going. If you would like to email the show, please email Charmaine at militantlymixed.com. That's S as in Sam, H-A-R, M as in Mary, A, N as in Nancy, E, at militantlymixed.com. And you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook at Militantly Mixed. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, where I get to be a little bit trash on occasion, that is at Mixed Girl Mane, M-A-N-E, on Twitter as well. And I think that is a good place to stop. So without further ado, here is my recording with Clarmundo Sullivan at the Lavender Library, arranged by Sierra College and Johnny Terry. Here we go. I'm very excited today right now because this is the first time that I'm bringing Militantly Mixed out in front of humans as opposed to being at my laptop with my headphones on. So thank you so much to Cindy and Nancy for allowing us to have this space to do this, and for everybody that participated in getting us together. Clarmundo and I spoke on the phone over the weekend just to get to know each other a little bit before we sat side by side, and I'm about to ask you all kinds of personal questions without knowing you. And we had a great conversation. So some of the stuff that we're talking about today is stuff that I've kind of learned a little bit about you, but we're just gonna have an organic conversation. And basically, Militantly Mixed is a podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. But as I am a very intersectional person, and all of us that are here are probably identify as very intersectional, our intersections get filtered through various lenses. And in my case, my hierarchical case, I first see the world through my race, and then I see the world through my sexual orientation, and then I see the world through my belief systems, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of something that we talked about, is that unlike, and forgive me for saying this way, mainstream queerness, our queerness is filtered through our ethnicity and our ethnic groups. And as mixed race folks, we have even more so, because we have to be all the races and all the cultural representation, and then we get to be our little queer ass self. So let's get into it. Before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience, give a little bit of background about yourself, and then we'll get into it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Charmaine, for having me today. I'm really, really thrilled that we have this opportunity. I'm Clarmundo Sullivan. Little quick history about me. Born and raised in Sacramento. I graduated from San Francisco State with my bachelor's in social work. Later went to UC Davis, where I got my master's in education with honors, of course. And then after I graduated from UC Davis, I decided to start a nonprofit organization here in Sacramento called Golden Rule Services, where For over 19 years, we've been providing free HIV, STD, and hepatitis C prevention services for people of color communities, particularly LGBTIQ people of color communities. So really, really proud of that work. And again, I'm just so excited to be here.
I really am. I'm really excited. So when we talked earlier, we kind of spoke about how the early stages of our life is figuring out what race we are or who we are culturally, because we both come from multiple. Everybody in our family doesn't look the same.
Yes.
Some of them are brown, some of them are darker brown,
Yes.
some of them are lighter brown. And so it's first trying to establish who we are in terms of that identity. And it's really not until, I guess we didn't really talk about this. It's really not for me until kind of middle school and early high school that I'm like, I knew the words gay and bisexual and lesbian. I was around people like this, but I wasn't that because you weren't that. Those were just people that were out in the world that you knew about. Mm-hmm. And so that's my period of trying to figure out how am I identifying. But I knew myself in terms of my mixedness. For you, what was your path to identity?
I appreciate the question. My father is African American and my mother is Latina, Mexican American. It's really interesting. I recently revisited her birth certificate. On the birth certificate, it says that she's white.
The and European thing.
Yeah, so that's a whole podcast in itself.
It is. But the Spanish blood European thing messes us up.
yeah. It's a very interesting history there. But long story short, so my early years in elementary school, I really did not see my mother as anything less than African American. I really didn't understand color at that time. Because it was Sacramento, California. I was young. I just didn't understand that whole piece. But let me tell you what made me understand that piece. I remember one time in middle school, one of the yard duty teachers called me the N-word. And so when I came home and I told my mother, she was livid. Now, mind you, she is about 5'2", and when she heard that this 6 foot tall, Russian woman called me the N-word, she stormed up to the school and she cussed, and you could hear it all the way down the hallway. And so I became, your mother is a badass mom. She's awesome. She cussed everybody out. But then when they saw my mother leave the office is when the dynamic changed. And the dynamic was like, well, wait a minute. I thought you were black. Your mom ain't black. And so, so what are you? And then, long story short, when I came home from school and had those conversations with my mother, that's when she started talking to me about, well, I am your mother, and I don't have to show you proof that I'm your mother. I am your mother. And so because it was the first time that I ever was confronted with trying to figure out this whole dynamic of, wow, she doesn't look like me, but I've never seen her as different. She was just my mother, and she loved me. And so when that was brought to me, then that's when I started noticing these subtle things that I didn't see before. Like, I remember watching television shows at the time. We're talking about the late 60s, early 70s. I started to become a lot more acutely aware of race. And I started realizing I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me on television. I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me in periodicals. I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me that in a lot of different places. But where I did see people that looked like they were African American or mixed, if you will, is there were always negative, stereotypical kind of images. We were the criminals, we were the rapists, we were the drug dealers. It was just very vilifying and demonizing at the time to understand that, oh my God, I belong to this group of people that people really do not like and want to render invisible. And so so I would say early kind of elementary school is when I started really kind of coming to grips with being black, being the N-word, if you will. But then the dynamic changed when my peers found out that my father was black. Then I became what we used to call, what would they call the word? It was, you're a half-breed. And for those audience members who may not know what that is, it's basically the equivalent of being called an N-word, but it's almost being less than
It's
the
less
N
than.
word. It's one layer below being the worst of the worst. Some people would think at that time in certain parts of the world, even now, that being black or being a person of African descent is the lowest of the low, the worst of the worst. And so then I started being called half breed. And so that was a whole different dynamic.
That opens up
It just opened up a
painful
whole
stuff.
different, like, well, how do I juggle being something that, I didn't choose to be? I didn't choose to be two different races. But, so it took me a process from elementary school all the way through high school. It wasn't until college when I finally felt like, oh my gosh, I'm learning about my both of my cultures, and I'm understanding about the contributions that we've made throughout the world. And then that's what changed my life, Charmaine, is when I took an ethnic studies course in college. And when I found out that there were African Americans that predated slavery, I was like, what? Because that's how we were taught in Sacramento school systems, was, the civil rights, well, slaves, roots, certain civil rights movement key figures that were African American or people of African descent. But then when I started learning about pre-slavery, where Africans were kings and queens, and then anthropology taught us that the oldest bones ever found in the world were found in Africa, which leads some people to believe that the first man and woman were African. So that changed my world. It made me feel a sense of self-esteem that I had never felt before. So that's kind of like the history of some of the stuff.
Yeah.
That,
The self-esteem thing, I think, is a pretty critical thing, and it comes up on the show a lot, is that at first you don't know you're different, and then a bastard child tells you that you're different in school, in elementary school, and then you got to go home to mommy and daddy and figure out what's different about me, why am I different, and then after that you own one of them, because you own the one that people grant you permission to own. You are black because you present blacker, or because your dad was black.
Yes.
In my case, I'm a yellow presenting black woman because my dad was black and I was raised in a black area. I talked black, I think black, but I was yellow. And so then there was the half-breed, the mongrel, the mulatto, the high yellow, the red bone,
Yes.
which I don't even know how I got red bone. It happens sometimes.
Yeah, it does. That's who you ask. That's who you ask.
All these things that indicate that we're not full black.
Yes.
And then within our other sides, it was if we even had access. So you and I spoke earlier on the phone when we spoke. It was about sort of not really even identifying or getting to identify on your Latin side as much because of both access, how your family were, and sort of how the world allowed you to be.
Yes, for me, and I'll just preface it by saying me, my grandparents, my maternal parents, my grandparents, they were Mexican they were Mexican and Spanish. That's how they identified. But they didn't approve of my father and my mother's marriage. They didn't approve of the dating, let alone the marriage.
And it predates Loving versus
Yes.
Virginia too, so
Yeah.
it's
Yes, because
kind of illegal at the time.
well, I think yes, on a national level, right? We know that there were unions,
Pockets of safety.
Pockets of safety. Yeah, I appreciate that. And so, because my grandfather, my mother's father, didn't identify as Mexican American, even though that's what's on his birth certificate. He didn't want. He was my father says that he was an assimilationist, and an acculturalist. He did not
Acultural,
yeah.
aculturalist.
Yeah, assimilation and acculturation types of behaviors. He did not want his daughter to date anybody outside of Caucasian identity. And so when my mother and my father started dating, long story short, they for a long time did not want to be involved with their half-breed grandchildren. We got the message very early that our grandparents had an issue with biraciality, if not African American individuals, when our cousins who were fully Mexican whenever they had school pictures, oh, they're all over the walls, you know, really proud, really excited. But when it came to the mixed kids, the biracial kids, we never saw our images on the nightstands or in the front rooms. When birthdays came around, you know, we didn't get any of that acknowledgement. It took me to graduate with from high school with honors and then college with honors for them to finally start opening up and saying, hey, you know, this, you know, I think maybe we've been a little bit rough. Maybe we've misunderstood.
They actually acknowledged that?
You know, actually later, before they passed, they did. I remember on my mother's deathbed, my grandfather came to visit her, and my aunt on my father's side was in the room. And and this is a man that was about 70 years old at the time. He apologized to my aunt and said, you know what, I'm really sorry for the way that I treated you and how I treated your family because they were black. Because, you know, he didn't apologize because it was wrong. He apologized because of the fact that it took him away from my mother, who had to make a decision on whether they wanted her loyalty was with her parents and her family or with her children.
Wow.
And so my mother's loyalty was always with us. But isn't that funny that, you know, when we finally get this, you know, apology, you know, for the racism and the maltreatment that my mother had to endure for years and years and years, and my father. It wasn't the fact that it wasn't because of racism and discrimination and prejudice. It was because because I could have spent more time with my daughter.
Wow.
So we knew.
It's almost like he was waiting for her to solve that problem so she can be back in his life versus just accepting you as his family also.
Yeah, you know, we saw little glimmers of tolerance. How about that? Okay. You know, just like people tolerate LGBTIQ individuals, you know, you can come to our church, but, you know, there's only a certain
Can't be in
level.
a leadership role.
Yeah, you know, we're going to stop you, you know, you're not fully accepted, but, you know, we're going to love the person and hate the sin kind of thing. So it was kind of like that dynamic when I was around my family who were people of Latin descent. I remember one time in high school, I met my mother's aunt for the very first time in my grandparents' home. And she had never met me, and I was in high school. And so just by chance, she was there, and she said, "Oh, well, nice to meet you, nephew." And then this is the next thing that came out of her mouth. She was like, you know what? You could really pass for Latino if you really wanted to. So why don't you decide to identify as Latino instead of black? You know, we know blacks, you know, just don't have a really fair deal, you know, in this country. So why don't you identify as Latino? You'd have better opportunities, you know.
This is like the thing that happens to all of us. I swear, it comes up so often on this show of someone in our life at some point tells us, it would be better for you if, and then they fill in the blank of which of all your things is the thing that would be most palatable. As if our faces could just...
Oh, yeah, we can just transform right away.
I was told by a Jewish woman in my 9th grade class during a proctored exam to select white, because technically I was half white, because my mom is half white, my dad's half white. I'd go further in life. And I was like, well, what about when they see me? And she goes, well, yeah, you'd probably just have to use an abbreviation for your initials, because I'm Charmaine, and that's going to clue in some weirdness for a white person. Yes. But also, like, eventually they're going to see me, so how am I going to pass for being white? And yeah, I mean, maybe on the Latin side, because there is African blood inside a lot of Latin folks, you could, but...
You know, but that wasn't her intent. You know, I wish that was the intent, that, hey, you know, you're an Afro-Latino. So that you need to understand that, you know, Africans and people of Latin descent, you know, they have a shared history. Mm-hmm. And so that would have felt a lot better than, hey, I want you to choose one or the other, and hey, let's choose the quote unquote better one, like she did. She was also a person that was ashamed of her Latin, you know, ancestry. And so she identified as white and married a white man. And so, you know, it's really unfortunate how, in order to climb the ladder of acceptance and privilege, you know, the further you not identify as a person of color or a person of color descent, you know, there's more resources. And I think that's what their primary motivation was, is that, you know, it worked for us,
Right.
so it might work for you, nephew. So why don't you? So long story short, instead of cussing her out, what I decided to do is say, what, no, I'm very comfortable with who I am. And so I appreciate what you said earlier, is that I think because I've always been accepted, from my African American side of the family, they didn't care if I was light skinned, dark skinned, mixed or not. They accepted me, 100%. I didn't get that same treatment from my Mexican American side of the family, and that hurt for a long time. It caused a lot of self-doubt. Why do they hate me? Did I do something wrong? What's going on here? My mother loves me, but why don't these individuals love me the same way? So, it was very, very confusing. And then I think the message that I got, Charmaine, from a very early age is what we always knew, is that at some point in the African American experience, if you had one drop of African American blood in you, then that's who you identified as, and you didn't have a choice. It didn't matter how you presented. And so I think I always felt like, well, this side of the family treats me very, very well, and so that's probably the reason why I identify as African American first. No shade to my Latin ancestry, because I love being bicultural, biracial. I love it, and there's nothing better for me. But it took me a while, to figure all that out. It wasn't explained to me for a very, very long time, and so there was a lot of forgiving. There was a lot of experiences where, I just couldn't navigate it. I couldn't figure it out.
It's such a strange thing, and it does come up often, and it's part of the reason why I feel it's so important to create spaces like this, podcast, video content, blogs, whatever, that show our stories, because the crossover always is one side accepted us, and so we are identifying that side just because that's where we got a little bit of love. And but also, if you do have any African American descent, or African descent more specifically, the one drop rule does apply to us, and even though technically it's not part of the law anymore, we can't help it. We absorbed it as a culture, as Black folks. We absorbed it, and it's in my face. Even though I present yellow, a white person's gonna walk past and they're not gonna tell that I'm Black. A Black person's gonna see me coming a mile away, and they may say, "You Black, right?" Or they might just give me the nod. And then I know that they see me and I don't have to ask that question. Whereas even though I'm technically half white, no white person's going to be like, "You must be a half white, quarter Japanese, quarter Black." That's never going to happen to me. And I think that's why we do tend to identify, if not identify with the browner of whatever we are, we identify with who showed us the first acceptance and who showed us the first love.
Yeah.
As you're coming to terms with figuring out how you're identifying and everything like that, racially and ethnically and culturally, then on top of it, you also have to try to figure out, in the time that you are coming up, what is your sexual orientation and how are you maneuvering as not only a queer person, but a POC, and more specifically a Black POC.
That was a process for me, as a person of color. It's one thing to be, biracial, but then when you add another layer of quote unquote minority status, being LGBTIQ, it opens up this whole other level of hate and disrespect and conditions. And so I remember when I was heavily involved in high school in the church. I went to a Spanish-speaking church, and so they were apostolic. So homosexuality or anything that was everything seemed like it was a sin. So there was very few things I could do. But I remember having these feelings that, I'm attracted to other men, but I'm going to go to hell if I think about it, let alone act upon it. And so I remember that just opened up a whole different level of stigma for me, because, I was still trying to, let me give an example of what I mean. Even in high school, when I was struggling with my sexuality or coming out, I remember coming to realize that my father didn't have resources, financial resources. My mom didn't have financial resources to send me to college. So the only way that I knew that I could potentially go to college was to excel academically. And then I was told that excelling academically wasn't enough, that you had to do all of these extracurricular activities to put on your application. And so I signed up for every group that was offered at Hiram Johnson, everything, from the math class to, the math, club to the Native American club. But it was really interesting what happened to me when I went to the Mexican American club. So I'm excited, surely I'm going to get into this club because I'm Mexican. Right. So I get into the after school club meeting, and there's a room full of people of Latin descent, and none of them look like me, by the way. But so when I get to the room, everybody turns around and they look at me like, what is he doing here? The Black Student Union is across the hall. And I remember feeling like, oh my God, not only do I have to deal with being treated differently from within my own family, but now I'm being treated from amongst my peers who are my people. These are people of Latin descent like I am. And so it verbally took for me to say, I belong here. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not going nowhere. Mm-hmm. For them to say, and we get it now, we understand. Well, how do you not understand that when people, like 3/4 of the world look like me, right. People of color? So not only had to deal with that racism and discrimination, but I also had to deal with coming out as a gay man who was a faith, person of faith. In the Black community, as you well know, it's just a taboo topic. Something, Black men. We're supposed to be straight. We're supposed to reproduce. We're supposed to have children. We're supposed to be strong, hyper masculine. We're supposed to, there's all of these sexual stereotypes, So I had that to deal with. But then, I didn't identify with all of those things. So it was this huge struggle. And at one point, I remember being in college feeling suicidal because I was trying to figure out, the God, what I'm being taught in church is that the God that loves me hates my guts. And so not only am I hearing this from Black churches, but I'm hearing this from the Latin churches that I was attending. So it felt like everybody wanted me to disappear. Everybody didn't want to validate who I was. And it was very, very isolating. It was very depressing. So I'm dealing with racism, dealing with culture, and dealing with how I was put multiple times in a position to choose mm-hmm. one or the other, So, how do you choose? A Black documentarian, his name was Marlon Riggs, put it best. He said, how do you choose from your left nut from your right nut? They're both, or fallopian tubes. But it's the same. It's the same thing.
Inclusive space.
Right. Yeah, we're in a safe place here. We're going to affirm everything here. I don't want letters. But that's kind of how it felt. So it was an additional layer. Yeah. It was like, oh my God, fuck. I'm already dealing with, what it's like to navigate as a Black man, a Black male in mm-hmm. America. Then, if I identify as Latino, there's racism and discrimination against that community as well. Mm-hmm. And then, here's the other piece that kind of really fucked me up, was that living here in Sacramento, I didn't see a lot of positive images in my community. And so, there's a lack of really good role models that I could look up to. And as a result of that, I felt less. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, well, maybe I am ugly. Maybe, the stereotypes for Black men is that we're ugly, we're lazy, we're animalistic, we're brutes. We're out to, we're naturally born criminals. And you know what? The truth of the matter is that I was raised in a culture of poverty like that, where I was raised amongst pimps and prostitutes and drug dealers and criminal activity. But, that didn't define who I was going to become. It could have, mm-hmm. I could have easily, been a statistic and did that. But something inside of me from a very early age, once I figured out what racism really was among, against black folks, I remember making a commitment to myself as I didn't want to be a statistic. And what I want to do is I want to prove all of these individuals who don't like me because I'm black or biracial, I'm going to prove them wrong. Because the notion is that because we're mixed or because we're people of color, that we're less, that we're deficient, that there's something wrong with us, that we're incapable of achieving anything positive. And so probably in high school is when I started saying, you know what, I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And that's kind of what has kept my sanity for a very, very long time in the midst of racism, in the midst of homophobia that I still experience, not only in the black community, but also in the Latin community. There's some very strong messages within both of those communities. And that's why I appreciate both of those communities, because we have similar cultural expectations when it comes to certain things. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily right. But I had to learn both. I had to understand, the cultures of both and what the expectations were of both, and how, when they both conflicted, what to do in that situation. If we talked about this in our conversation. If I go to prison, I'm not gonna know where I'm gonna go. Because
we actually did talk about this because you're supposed to tribe up, and how do you tribe up when you look like us?
Yeah, and then but it's really sad, Charmaine, that and I know your podcast discusses this, but just being African American, there's so many different levels of even internalized racism that we have to deal with. So not only do we have to deal with racism from outside of our culture, but we have to deal with racism sometime within our culture. The colorism, from the hair to light skin, dark skin, to being on welfare, so classism.
What kind of black you are.
Yeah, what kind of black are you? And, it's just a huge navigation process. So what I would say to your listeners is that if you identify as a person of color, but especially if you are biracial, I want you to go and apply for mental health services, because you are a survivor and we are post-traumatic stress survivors. Because how else would you explain why people of color represent so many of the worst social cultural indicators? As people of color, we tend to have the worst poor health outcomes. We tend to have the less educational attainment. We seem to be less employed. There's all of these different, we call it social determinants of health, where all of these areas where we're supposed to be equal and we're supposed to be successful, we're not getting the same piece of the pie as the quote unquote dominant culture. And so, we share these experiences. And it's just so interesting how when you add for yourself as a biracial woman, and then, as a person who identifies as atheist, then, oh my God, your culture says that you're supposed to have a faith system.
Oh, I'm designed to not fit in this place. To try to list out my things. I'm a Black, Japanese, Caucasian, British, bisexual, hyphenate, polyamorous, atheist woman.
Oh my God.
There's no space for me in Trump's America. You deal with these things, and you get to a point where sometimes you have to choose, which is why I say that I'm hierarchical in my identification, because sometimes I have to be a Black woman right now, or sometimes I have to represent for Asian folks, or sometimes but it's tough though, because once we get down into the LGBT section, I don't comfortably maneuver a mainstream LGBT space, both because I'm bisexual and polyamorous, and because I'm a person of color.
Yes.
Because a lot of the resources that are available to the LGBTQ community, people don't look like us.
Charmaine, one of the most disappointing things that I experienced when I finally did come out in Sacramento, California, as an openly gay Black man. That's revolutionary, by the way, even in Sacramento. But one thing that was so disappointing for me was the lack of African-American the lack of African American images in the LGBT community. The LGBT community in Sacramento, when I was coming out, was very white male, middle class white male kind of focused. Women who love women in Sacramento, used to complain like forever, like we're here, we exist.
That's why I didn't know what I was, because I didn't know lesbians were a thing. I didn't see them. I didn't know that it was okay.
Yeah. I remember going to my first gay bar here in Sacramento, and I was scared shitless because, again, mind you, I was apostolic. So I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near homosexuals, and I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a gay club. So I was like trembling and shaking, and I was looking around, didn't know what to do. And I remember when I went in there, I was like, oh my God, look at all these people, they're gay, they're like me. And so, I was thinking that, there's going to be a wide, come to us, we're your family, we're your peers, you're one of us. And I experienced the total opposite. They looked at me like I was other. They looked at me like, why are you looking at me? Why are you, I don't want you. You're black. I felt ugly. I felt isolated. I felt non-affirmed. I felt, so that was just the humanistic piece of that experience. And then as I explored further, I didn't see any employees there that looked like me. I didn't see any literature that looked like me, that spoke to me as a person of color, let alone African American. And I was like, oh my God, is this what the gay community is all about? And so it kind of, if I wasn't careful, I could have internalized racism that, I'm still ugly, even in this community. I'm still black. I'm still unattractive. I'm still undesired. I'm still an object of, eroticism. I'm this, because I'm a black man. You don't care about my culture. You don't care about me and what my interests are. All you know is the stereotypes that exist within the LGBTIQ community, one of which was, you have a big black dick. Mm-hmm. So would as a Caucasian gay man at the time, would they invite me to their homes and introduce me as their partner? No. But if they wanted to get between my legs because they thought I had a big dick, all day long. I remember going to gay bars where they asked me for several pieces of ID. I'm in a long line because, it's the only gay bar in the area. So I'm seeing all kinds of Caucasian going in there. Here's my ID, have a good time. But when I got to the front of the line, sir, we need to see 5 pieces of ID. Well, okay, I have
for an apartment.
Yeah, right. It's like
you got a gas bill.
Yeah, I was like, what's going on here? And so those encounters, I was very, very disappointed. Right. My initial experience coming out in the LGBTIQ community here in Sacramento was very negative, and and as a result of that, I can see why, unfortunately, there's members of the LGBTIQ community who are suicidal, because you're taking a risk of coming out. So that could mean that you're losing your family, you're losing your friends, you're losing employment opportunities, because you're thinking that you're coming to this community that's going to embrace you and love you for who you are. And why wouldn't they? Because they should definitely understand what it feels like to have a minority status put upon them because of how they're treated. Mm-hmm. And so to experience that other third level of stigma was just awful. And like I said, there was a point in time where a lot of people don't know this, but like I said, I was suicidal because I could not. It was too much. I had 3 different minority statuses that I was dealing with, and sometimes they complemented each other, sometimes they worked well together, but oftentimes they didn't work very well together. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, where do I fit in? Where do I belong? It's a conditional acceptance in all of these different communities, and I better watch what I say and what I do, because then I become a stereotype. I become a statistic if I act a certain way or do a certain thing. And so I think some people would say that, if you come out in the gay community, everything's going to be wonderful and lovely. And look, there's 25 colors in the rainbow flag. So, so there's got to be a place here for you. And that wasn't my experience, and that's not my experience. That's probably not the experience of a lot of people of color first. But, we saw the same thing with women who love women, here, particularly here in Sacramento. If you were not a white gay man, oh, who are you? What, why are you important? You're a woman. That's what it really meant. You're a woman. This is about a men who love men kind of a dynamic, and you don't fit into that dynamic. And what's really pissy about that is that when the HIV/AIDS epidemic hit in 81, and you saw all of these white gay men getting sick, who was there to take care of us when we were HIV positive and experiencing AIDS complications? Primarily, it was our lesbian sisters. And I think that's one of the pieces of the HIV/AIDS epidemic that is so unacknowledged. Is that our sisters came to bat for us when our families disowned us, put us in hospitals, put us in what do you call those places for mental health?
Sanitariums?
Yeah, just all of these negative things that happened to us when we came out as gay. So again, as a gay man, we had to deal with not only being ostracized from our families and our church families and the society, but then when you tacked on HIV/AIDS, then that was a whole different level of stigma. And so, I think when we talk about, for me, as an Afro-Latino gay man, there's just so many different layers. It's a miracle that anybody who identifies as I do has any kind of success or any kind of stability or any kind of, because there's so much that's upon us. It's a huge weight to carry. And that's why we see, even still, a lot of African American gay men identify as straight because they don't want to deal
Our community is not welcoming of
yeah,
it.
it's not, and so I remember I did a speaking engagement. I was a speaker at a conference, keynote speaker, and they wanted to hear about my experience and the intersectionality of being Black and Latino. And so, I told them that, it was very challenging for me. It's always been very challenging for me, and it's not that easy even today. There's still racism that exists. There's still stigma. There's still this notion of having to juggle all of these different social role expectations. And so, but the good news is, despite all of the isms and the obias that I've experienced in my life, I've been able to overcome and become resilient. And I think that's what we learn. And that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, as the African American experience for me has been, is that we're resilient. We have learned how to overcome all kinds of obstacles when it comes to racism and discrimination and prejudice and all that kinds of stuff. So it, through my experiences, my negative experiences, we were equipped with being stronger. I tell our clients at my clinic that, Trump is going to kill us all. We're gloom and doom. We're not going to survive Trump. And I say, you know what? If you're an African American, you've already know what it feels like to be a survivor, because this is not the first administration that oppressed people of color, that oppressed women, that oppressed LGBTIQ communities. And then when you tack on poverty, being poor, which a lot of people of color unfortunately are, because we don't have the same opportunities as other communities. I know how it feels to be poor. So if Trump cuts 25 different programs because I know what it feels to be Black or Latino, and the limited resources and the income that some of the opportunities present to us because we're other, I think I'm going to survive. I think many of us are going to survive, and we're going to look back and say, wow, why did we ever doubt that we're going to survive Trump when we've survived since we stepped foot, on this continent? We're resilient. we know how it feels to do without resources. We know how it feels like to do what some people would say Jesus did in the Bible, where he took 2 fishes and 5 loaves and fed 1,000 people. I saw that happen in my family all my life, and so, if there's anything to be said about being biracial, is that, we can take what's amazing about 2 cultures that have made some significant contributions to the world, and we can take the negative experiences that has challenged us to be resilient. We can take that and we can use that as an empowerment. So we can either be a victim or we can be a survivor. And again, that's who we are as people of color. It might be radical, militantly radical for me to say that, but I would say that that's my truth. And quiet as it's kept is probably the truth of so many other people that identify like you and I do.
So on this show, we do deal, a lot of times trauma comes up, and the difficulties of maneuvering the world through our lenses happen all the time. So I like to end the show on a positive note and ask, of all the stuff we talked about today and everything, what do you love most about being mixed?
Oh my God. What don't I like about being mixed would be my answer. I love, let me tell you what being mixed, one of the things I like best or most about being mixed is that because I understand what it feels like to be a person of color and being 2 different people of color, I know what minority status means twice. And so it's very difficult for me to not empathize with other individuals who are quote unquote minorities.
Right.
I know, how dare I treat somebody who is of an quote unquote another minority status any different when I know how it feels like.
Right.
So what it's taught me is it's taught me unconditional love. It's taught me unconditional acceptance for other people who identify with the struggle of being quote unquote different and dealing with stigma.
Right. Being mixed is awesome.
Mixed power.
They just need to see more of us out there. Well, thank you so much for coming on to my show with me and coming to the space. Thank you to the Lavender Library here in Sacramento for inviting us. Thank you to Sierra College for making it all happen. And yeah, don't forget to be your mixed ass self.
Ooh, and if anybody wants to learn more about the organization, is that going
to... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go. So, talk about that.
Okay, may I? Yeah. So I'm the executive director of Golden Rule Services here in Sacramento, and we have some really great resources for people of color who need resources around HIV and STD and sexual health. And so our website is www.goldenruleservicessacramento.org. And you can go on the website and find some really, really great resources. And we're definitely like you. We're always welcoming and accepting of support. So go to the website. I'm challenging all of you. Go to the website and make a donation. Show some love and support. And hopefully they'll do the same thing for you.
We'll put it in the show notes too, so that they'll be able to just click a link and support all these different organizations, because it's representation is what helps us, I think, make those extra steps. And that's what the show is about. I think that's what the Lavender Library is certainly about.
Yes.
And also the Golden Rule Services.
Yeah, so if you live in the Sacramento area, you must visit the Lavender Library. There are resources here that will affirm you, not only as a person of color, but also as a same gender loving individual or LGBTIQ. And that's what we strive for at Golden Rule as well, is that we want to make sure that there's resources in the community for everyone, including some of the most vulnerable communities here in Sacramento, which would be people of color. So I thank you for inviting me. I'm so thrilled.
Thank you. All right. Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Charmaine Johnson. Music is by David Bogan, The One. And if you like what you heard on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts.
ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.